Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day to day lives. Let's start with the video. My wife's family has this yearly tradition where they all get together to celebrate familial bonds, and it's a really big deal for all of them. They've turned it into some kind of fair or competition to brag about their yearly achievement or to boast about how good their kids are. Honestly, I think it's a great idea because it gives us an opportunity to escape our daily lives and let loose. But the way they have turned this family time into a competition made it a waste of time. If all they want to do is show each other down, then I don't want to waste my time on it. But I don't have a choice. I've made an agreement with my wife where she'd let me go out for a weekend trip with the boys without any phone calls or check ins as long as I go to this family get together. So I suck it up and do it. It was bearable for the last few years, but now it's downright annoying because of my sister in law's kids. So she has a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old daughter. They had a nasty habit of calling me dad whenever we met. At first, when they were just a few years old, it wasn't that big of a deal. I let it slide because I was under the impression their parents would make them stop when they grow up a little. It may seem that being called dad isn't a big deal, but both my wife and I have discussed the topic and have decided we don't want any kids of our own. So it's very uncomfortable for me to be addressed as dad because I associate the word with the kind of responsibility that I do not want to undertake. This year, I was hoping they'd stop, but as soon as they arrived, the kids shouted dad and ran into me for a hug. I gave them a hug, but my mood surely went down. It's about time they realized I'm their uncle and not dad, and sister in law should start correcting them. But that day, they called me dad a few more times in front of sister in law and her husband, and yet she didn't do anything to stop them. Both of them were sitting idly, having the time of their lives, just relaxing. But I couldn't do that, so I told my sister in law jokingly that the kids should be able to recognize their dad by now, and no parent would want their kids to come across as slow. I thought a little jibe was enough to get them to do something about this habit, but I was so wrong. The next day, they kept addressing me as dad even after I told them to call me uncle. I was already at the end of my wits with my wife's extended family trying to show me their family pictures on phone or talk about how they bought a new place or got the old one renovated. The only topic of conversation they have is always something big and flashy, and I wanted nothing more than the week to be over. My only solace was being with my wife, and unfortunately, she was busy with her mom when the kids called me dad again. I had had it enough, so I went and told sister in law that this habit of their kids is making me uncomfortable, and she should ask them to stop. She looked at me funny as if I've offended her entire bloodline and said it wasn't a problem until now, to which I said they were too young to understand the difference at that age, but they've grown enough to know who's the uncle and who's their dad. So I asked her to talk to them, and she said she'll do it. I felt a little relieved and even guilty for losing control, but 2 days later, whatever guilt I had just vanished. There was this game they all played to include both the kids and parents in the same activity. The pairs were usually one kid with one parent. My sister in law's husband was drinking heavily that day, and when the time came to play the game, he was too tipsy to walk straight. So he told his oldest that he'd have to sit out this time. That's when the kid approached me and said, Dad, will you come and pair with me? Instead of answering him, I stared at sister in law. Being called dad was one thing, but to participate in a dad activity is something far beyond the line. But sister in law was once again silent, so I told her son that I can't go with him as I'm not their dad. But his face dropped, and sister in law's husband took one look at it and clapped me on my back, saying, Don't be a party pooper and just have fun. My wife and sister-in-law joined him and cornered me into thinking I'm being dramatic and I should just go with the kid. But this was too much for me. I told my wife I can't do this and she should understand it, seeing how she knows I don't want kids exactly for this reason. But sister-in-law and her husband started protesting, saying I'm being unfair and overdramatic, and if I really hate their family, I should leave. They said I had no right to do something like that to my wife, and that sent me over the edge. I went inside the house, packed my bags, and left the place instantly. The following day, my wife came back home and said what I did was incredibly insulting and embarrassing for her. She said I should have thought twice before walking out in front of the whole family and that our agreement doesn't stand anymore. So I told her how I've already mentioned to sister-in-law and to my wife how being called dad makes me uncomfortable and they shouldn't have tried to force me, so it's not entirely on me. But that only escalated the situation more. I ended up having a huge fight with my wife and now she's giving me the silent treatment. In any other situation, I would have apologized first, but I really think I'm allowed to express things that make me uncomfortable. And if being called a dad is one of them, others should understand. Am I really being an a-hole here, or am I right to be annoyed? Was what I did really too far of a step? It's been over a week, and my wife and I are still not talking. This is the longest we've gone without communicating, and I don't know how to feel about this one. I understand that I might have overreacted a little bit by walking out of that place without my wife, but shouldn't she understand how this could actually be a big deal for me if I'm still refusing to feel guilty about what happened? In other news, my mother-in-law called me yesterday and advised me to think about how important this family get-together is for everyone because apparently I, being an only child, find it hard to grasp the concept of togetherness. Like, excuse me? I might have been an only child, but I am definitely not still a child. I knew what kind of family I was marrying into, and that or the get-together has never been an issue. I feel like everyone is forgetting about why I reacted the way I did and is focusing on how my walking out affected my wife. Anyway, I didn't want to be any more rude to anyone else, so I let mother-in-law get everything on her mind out and then politely excused myself and ended the call. All that conversation did was make me realize how unseen I'm feeling in this family and how I need to have an honest and open conversation with my wife about my side of things. So I talked to my wife after 12 days of giving each other the silent treatment. I couldn't do it anymore as it was starting to affect my work life and I need the healthy peace back in my life. So I texted her. We needed to talk, and that evening we got down to have a proper conversation about what happened. I let my wife go first, seeing how she was able to hold out for 12 days when usually her silent treatments last for 2 days at max. She told me that her main issue was the fact that I got up and left without standing my ground in front of everyone. She said that she understands being called a dad could be annoying for me, even if it's not a big deal for others, and she respects my boundaries, but at the same time, nothing in the world gives me the right to insult or embarrass her in front of her family. I protested that she's embarrassed about me leaving when her family was actively making me uncomfortable. Then she should have walked out with me instead of staying there for longer. It's not like I just got up and left. It took me an hour to calm down and start packing. She had plenty of time to come to me, but she chose to stay with her sister. That's one huge red flag, and if it weren't for the marriage vows, I wouldn't even be having this discussion anymore. My wife got more pissed at what I said, and no matter how much I tried to explain to her that I'm not dismissing her feelings, just trying not to invalidate mine, she wouldn't listen to me. In the end, we came to the conclusion that I'd talk to her without doing something like that again, and she'd be careful to understand my feelings better before being hurt by my actions. So we're back to talking, but I still strangely feel like something important was amiss. My wife told me today about the call she received from sister-in-law. Apparently, sister-in-law thinks that I'm still wrong and that it's fine for the kids to call me dad. She told my wife how she was waiting for me to realize that and apologize to them for being rude last time, but now she's given hope and has accepted the fact that I'm just uncourteous and impolite. She'd even tried to tell my wife that she could have done better than me, which is insulting on so many levels. My wife didn't put up with any of the shade sister in law was throwing at me and told sister in law without sugarcoating her words that she supports me and that sister in law should be better off teaching her kids who their parents are, just in case they go around calling a bunch of strangers their dad. She didn't even give sister in law a chance to say anything and hung up after saying never to call her again just to talk shit about her husband. The sheer feeling of being proud inside me was unfathomable when she told me about the call, and any lingering anger I had just vanished. I'm glad that at least my wife understands where I'm coming from and didn't let her hurt emotions come in the way of her love for me. YTA, I was with you until you said you walked out on your wife. That's where you went overboard. You should have asked her to come with you or given her an ultimatum to really drive home the seriousness of the situation. But you just left her hanging, and if there's anything worse than outright hatred, it's neglect. NTA, not the a-hole. Sister-in-law is the one responsible for this whole mess, and you don't need to apologize to anyone for it. My mother-in-law is very religious. Like watching Harry Potter is a sin religious. Her son, my husband, is not at all. My family is also not religious. My dad was left-handed and went to Catholic school, so as you can imagine, he had a bad time there that left him with a lot of trauma. He passed away a few years ago. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people say he is watching over me. That's fine if that's what you believe, but it's not what I believe, and to me, it's just sugarcoating the truth. He is gone forever. He isn't watching over me, he's just gone, and I accept that. No amount of he's watching over you will change that. I have told her this before, if she could just cool it with that talk about my dad, especially for the wedding. We got married a few weeks ago. We didn't get married in a church or by a priest, which was its own battle with my mother-in-law. I really wanted to have fun and not think about my dad. At the reception, she took the mic to give an impromptu speech. She went on for 5 minutes about my dad and how he is there in spirit watching over you, blah, blah. All the things I asked her not to. I put on a good face, but I felt miserable the rest of the night. All her speech did was remind me my dad wasn't there, which up until that point I did a good job putting out of my mind. He's not watching over. He just isn't there. Nothing can change that. The next morning at brunch, I was quiet and she asked why, and I told her the truth. Her speech made me feel bad and think of my dad, and it just really wasn't appropriate and made me really sad. This caused her to throw a fit at brunch, screaming about how she put up with our disrespecting her religion, and this was the final straw. She told us our marriage won't last and stormed out. It kind of ended the brunch early, and that was the end of our wedding weekend. Family is divided, some saying I should have kept my mouth shut, and others saying that she should have respected my wishes for one day. Now everyone in the family is taking sides, and his mom hasn't spoken to us since. She's a bully. You asked her to stop doing something that upset you. She didn't. Tell her she made Jesus cry by being so unkind to you. Shortest version in the Bible, Jesus wept. John 11:35. NTA, the fact you've asked her beforehand and she blatantly ignored what you asked should answer that there and then. If she can't respect that, I'd be worried about what else she won't respect in the future. Also, obviously, I don't know where you're from, but I always thought the left-handed thing was only in Ireland. For many, many years, kids were beaten and abused by their teachers, which were just priests, for being left-handed, believing they were the children of the devil. Me, female, and my sister, Kate, have different religions. I am Catholic and she is evangelical. We have our ideological differences, but we have a very close relationship. After all, it was just me, her, and my mother our entire childhood, adolescence. I was proposed 3 months ago. I decided I would have MOH, my sister, and no bridesmaid. My fiance agreed and only chose his best friend. There will be a religious ceremony at the church, and then we will go to a venue here, and the party will take place. For me, it's important to get married in church. It will happen in 4 months. When I asked Kate to be my MOH, and she was super excited. But during the preparations, when she learned that I would have a ceremony at the church, she seemed uncomfortable, but I didn't question it. I waited for her to speak. Well, last week she called me for coffee and said that she didn't feel comfortable going to a Catholic church because of her religion, so she couldn't attend the religious ceremony. But she would love to go to the party, participate in everything. She just wouldn't go at the ceremony. I got really upset and said, "This is an important moment for me, much more than the party, and I wish all the people I love were there, including you." She replied, "I don't feel comfortable going into churches other than my own, but I will participate in everything else." Me, "I don't feel comfortable in any other churches either, but I went with the greatest honor to your wedding because I know it was important to you as well as for me." She still stuck to the decision, and I felt so tired and sad that I just got up and walked away. After a lot of thinking, I called her and said, "If one of the people I love the most can't stay 2 hours at the most important moment for me, even though I asked it to be there for me and not for our religion, then I think you shouldn't come to my wedding. If you can't make a concession for me, then I shouldn't make one for you." Well, she keeps texting me saying I'm overreacting and that I should respect her stance. She and my mother are pressuring me to go back on my decision. I'm just really upset. It's something extremely important to me. I would like to have her be there and on my side, but she doesn't want to, and I feel betrayed because I did it for her and she didn't for me. AITA? NTA. If her faith is that fragile that being in a building where people practice a slightly different method of faith to the same God she worships, then she is beyond ridiculous. Write her off. Her fragile faith is more important to her than family. A MOH who feels okay with refusing to be at the wedding. Unbelievable. My wife and I currently live with my mom. It is super embarrassing, and believe me, we are trying to get out, but we had no option for the moment. My mom and my wife have never gotten along, and my mom is a pretty shitty mother-in-law. I'm on my wife's side 100% and shut it down when my mom starts. Sunday was my wife's birthday, and my wife is huge on birthdays. We had a whole day planned, and I had some extra surprises. I know from previous years that she has sky-high expectations for birthdays and gets disappointed if there is any setback. We were getting ready to go out, and my mom fell down the stairs. It was totally her fault. She was running in heels. Obviously, we both went to her, but she was adamant that she didn't need help. I told her she needed to go to the emergency room as she couldn't move her wrist and was quite literally withering in pain. I felt I had to offer to drive her, as she can't drive with one arm, and I've heard you can't Uber if you are clearly injured for liability reasons. I saw my wife's face fall, but I just felt like, what was I supposed to do? My mom declined, and I asked her how she was going to get there. She said she didn't know, but she didn't want to ride from me. So we went out for the day, but my wife told me I was insensitive for asking. When we returned home to change for our bigger evening out, my mom was back from the hospital. She was looking for something to eat, but hadn't done the week's shopping and was struggling to find something she could get on her own. I offered to make her something. At first she declined, but then gave in. When my wife came down, I said I'd be ready in a few minutes, and she looked incredibly hurt. It was just grilled cheese, and it didn't take that long. Also, my mom had been at the ER for hours and hadn't eaten. Before we left, I asked if she needed anything, and she said no. The moment we got to the car, my wife accused me of catering to my awful mother on her birthday. I pointed out it was an unforeseen emergency, and she told me my mother being stupid and running downstairs shouldn't be my priority. She said my mom has her own partner. He was out of state and did offer to fly home, but wouldn't have made it until early the next morning anyway, so still couldn't have given her a ride or made her dinner. And she can't forgive me for making her second fiddle to my mom on her birthday. I would just like to add how your wife wants a grand birthday when you cannot even afford to live by yourselves. NTA. Pretty sure the wife is the problem here. God forbid a severely injured woman, that is, giving you a place to live, is a priority. Your mom should kick both out. That was beyond cruel. Hopefully, mom's husband steps up and kicks them out.